When you venture into the wilderness, are you ready to face death just to save a helpless creature? That's the question a man must confront when he stumbles upon a bear cub trapped on a cliff, where one wrong move could be fatal. What will happen next when he decides to risk everything to rescue it? The journey ahead is filled with unimaginable dangers. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. No more waiting, the story begins right now. James Callahan adjusted the straps of his worn backpack and surveyed the expansive wilderness before him. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the Wyoming mountains, painting the rugged terrain with hues of gold and green. He inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp air that carried the faint scent of pine and damp earth. James had always found solace in these solitary hikes, away from the noise of the world, armed only with his camera and an insatiable curiosity for nature's raw beauty. Today's destination was a remote ridge he had researched meticulously. It was said to offer unparalleled views of the valley below, but more importantly, it was rumored to be home to elusive wildlife rarely seen by human eyes. James had envisioned capturing a moment that would make the cover of a nature magazine, a shot so compelling it would tell its own story. As he trudged along the uneven trail, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots was the only sound breaking the silence. He paused occasionally to snap photos of the towering evergreens or the play of light on the rocky slopes. Each step felt like a step closer to the extraordinary. The trail narrowed as he climbed higher, the drop-off to his right growing more precarious with every turn. Suddenly, a faint, high-pitched sound reached his ears. He stopped, his senses sharpening. It was a cry, weak but persistent. His heart quickened as he scanned the area, trying to pinpoint its source. The sound came again, more desperate this time. Carefully stepping closer to the edge, James peered over, his breath caught in his throat. Just below, on a narrow ledge, a tiny bear cub clung to the rocky outcrop. Its small frame quivered with fear as it let out another plaintive cry. The cub's dark eyes darted around, searching for a way out, but the jagged rocks above and the sheer drop below left no escape. James quickly assessed the situation. The cub had likely slipped while exploring, and its mother was nowhere in sight. The ledge it stood on was barely wide enough to support it, and the violent river far below made the scene even more perilous. He felt a pang of helplessness mixed with a surge of responsibility. He whispered to himself, stating that he couldn't just leave the cub there, but how could he help without putting himself in danger? His mind raced with possibilities. Retrieving rope from his backpack, he contemplated if it could support him while he attempted a rescue. James's heart pounded as he tightened the rope around his waist, securing it to a sturdy pine tree rooted firmly in the rocky soil. The cub's cries grew sharper, tugging at him with an urgency he couldn't ignore. Against his better judgment, he decided to act, fully aware of the risks. He knew that climbing down would put his life in danger, but the thought of leaving the helpless animal to its fate gnawed at him. The idea of the cub slipping further and plummeting into the roaring river below was unbearable. He rummaged through his backpack and pulled out a carabiner in a makeshift harness fashioned from straps he carried for his camera gear. He hesitated briefly, testing the strength of each knot with trembling hands. This was not what he had prepared for when he set out that morning. He muttered under his breath, reasoning with himself, reminding himself of the potential dangers. But the cries of the cub cut through his doubts like a knife. Stepping cautiously to the edge, James glanced down at the ledge. The distance was greater than he had initially estimated, and the jagged rocks made the descent even more treacherous. His muscles tensed as he began lowering himself, gripping the rope tightly. Each step brought him closer to the cub, but also closer to danger. His boots struggled to find solid footing on the crumbling rock face, and loose pebbles skittered down, disappearing into the depths below. Halfway down, his heart sank as he considered the possibility of the cub's mother returning. A protective bear could appear out of nowhere, and there would be no escape if she perceived him as a threat. He scanned the area, his senses heightened, but the wilderness remained eerily quiet. Even the usual chirping of birds seemed to have faded, leaving only the sound of the river's relentless roar. As he descended further, James's mind wavered between fear and determination. The cub had stopped crying and was now staring at him, its small body trembling as it pressed itself against the rocky wall. The animal's vulnerability strengthened James's resolve. He reassured himself with every movement, telling himself that he could do this, that he would save the cub and make it back to the top unharmed. But the cliffside had other plans. His foot slipped on a loose rock, sending a jolt of adrenaline through him. He clung to the rope, his knuckles white as he tried to steady himself. For a brief moment, his mind screamed at him to turn back, to abandon the rescue and save his own life. The seriousness of his situation became painfully clear, and yet the cub's wide, pleading eyes held him captive. Finally, James reached the ledge. His feet landed on the narrow outcrop and he pressed his back against the cliff for balance. The cub backed away slightly, unsure of his presence, but too exhausted to resist. James moved slowly, speaking in a calm, soothing tone, hoping to gain the animal's trust. The cub whimpered but didn't try to escape, its small body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The cub, now silent, pressed itself further against the cold rock wall, its tiny frame trembling uncontrollably. James remained still for a moment, careful not to startle it. His own body was tense, his muscles taut from the climb and the sheer danger of his position. He knew any sudden movement could either frighten the cub or send them both tumbling into the abyss below. He crouched low, balancing precariously on the narrow ledge, and began murmuring softly. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded loudly in his chest. He didn't know if the cub could understand the tone of his words, but he hoped it could feel his calm. He made no sudden movements, allowing the cub to observe him. Its dark eyes darted to his face, then to his hands, before glancing nervously at the sheer drop behind it. James reached into his backpack slowly, pulling out the cloth sling he had prepared earlier. The cub flinched at the motion, its tiny paws scrabbling against the rock in panic. James froze, murmuring again in a steady rhythm. He took another step closer, his feet finding purchase on the unsteady ledge. He felt the rock shift slightly under his weight, and his stomach clenched. The cub's breathing was rapid, its fear palpable. James stretched out the cloth, holding it open as gently as he could. The cub whimpered, unsure but too weak to resist. Slowly he edged closer, finally reaching the cub. Its fur was coarse under his fingers as he carefully scooped it into the sling. The cub struggled briefly, but his murmured reassurances seemed to soothe it. Just as James secured the sling around his chest, he heard a sharp crack. The sound of a loose rock giving way echoed through the canyon. Before he could react, his footing slipped. His body lurched sideways, the rope jerking violently against his harness. He swung dangerously over the ledge, one hand grasping desperately at the rock face. Pain shot through his shoulder as he slammed against the cliffside, the force jarring him. For a terrifying moment, he thought the rope might give way. His mind raced, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The cub whimpered in the sling, its tiny body pressing tightly against him. Summoning every ounce of strength, James pushed himself upright, his injured shoulder throbbing with each movement. He steadied himself on the ledge, his legs trembling as he adjusted his grip on the rope. The climb back up now seemed even more difficult. His shoulder ached with every pull, the pain sharp and unrelenting. But the weight of the cub against his chest reminded him of why he couldn't give up. The ascent was agonizingly slow. Each step felt heavier, the strain on his injured arm making it nearly unbearable. Sweat dripped down his face, stinging his eyes. He focused on the rope, on the small, reassuring tug of the tree above, holding his weight. Finally, with one last pull, James hoisted himself and the cub over the edge. He collapsed onto the solid ground, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. The cub let out a soft cry, still trembling in the sling. James lay there for a moment, the pain in his shoulder a dull throb now. Relief washed over him as he unfastened the sling and carefully placed the cub on the soft earth. The cub looked at him, its wide eyes filled with what James could only describe as cautious trust. He leaned back against the tree, his body aching but his heart full. He had done it, but something told him this ordeal wasn't over. James's mission of capturing Yellowstone National Park's beauty through his lens flashed through his mind, a bittersweet reminder of how far things had spiraled from his original plan. His camera bag, once neatly packed with high-end lenses and tools, now lay battered and scattered. The fall down the ravine had left some of his equipment damaged beyond repair. The glass of his favorite lens cracked and its frame bent. The tripod was nowhere to be found, likely lost during the scramble to save the cub. He glanced at the shattered pieces and felt a pang of disappointment. Those tools had been his way of preserving Yellowstone National Park's essence, of showing the world the hidden wonders of this untamed land. But now his focus has shifted entirely. Instead of snapping pictures, he was living the raw, untamed reality of nature. Dangerous, unpredictable, and deeply humbling. James barely had a moment to collect himself when a low, rustling sound came from the nearby bushes. His muscles tensed, the relief he had felt seconds ago replaced by a jolt of fear. His eyes darted to the cub, now sitting on shaky legs and letting out a tiny, plaintive cry. The sound grew louder and then she appeared, a massive figure emerging from the shadows of the trees. Lucky was enormous, her dark fur glistening in the sunlight. Her powerful frame moved with deliberate intent, her sharp eyes locking onto James and the cub. James froze, his breath caught in his throat. He knew that running wasn't an option. Any sudden movement could provoke her. Lucky advanced slowly, her gaze shifting between her cub and the strange human sitting mere feet away. James braced himself, his body rigid, prepared for the worst. His injured shoulder throbbed as he tried to appear non-threatening. Lucky stopped a few feet from the cub, her massive frame towering over them both. For a tense moment, she stood still, her eyes fixed on James. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. But then something unexpected happened. The bear leaned down, nudging her cub gently with her nose. The cub responded with a soft cry, stumbling toward her. The mother bear's gaze returned to James. There was no aggression in her posture, no hint of anger. Instead, there was something else, something almost like understanding. Her dark eyes lingered on him, and James felt a strange sense of connection. It was as if she recognized his intentions and understood that he had saved her cub. The bear turned slowly, guiding her cub toward Yellowstone National Park. James watched, his body still tense as the pair disappeared into the trees. Just before vanishing, Lucky looked back one last time. Her gaze held an almost human-like quality, a silent acknowledgement that left James in awe. When they were gone, James collapsed back against the tree, his body finally relaxing. Yellowstone National Park was quiet once more, but his heart was full. It was a moment he would never forget, a reminder of the delicate balance between humans and the wild. James returned home, still shaken but deeply moved by his encounter with Lucky and her cub. His cabin, nestled at the edge of Yellowstone National Park, felt like a sanctuary. The quiet surroundings were comforting, yet something about the experience lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that the mother bear's gaze had been more than just a look. It had carried a depth, almost as though she had made a silent promise. The first strange occurrence happened 2 nights later. James stepped outside in the early morning light, carrying his camera gear. On the ground near his cabin, he noticed deep claw marks etched into the wooden post of his porch. The marks were fresh, the edges splintered as if they had been made only hours before. His first thought was a wandering bear, but the positioning of the marks, low and deliberate, felt different, as though they were meant to be noticed. Brushing it off as coincidence, James continued with his day. But later, as he walked along a nearby trail, he saw something unusual. A small pile of berries and roots sat neatly on a rock, untouched and oddly placed. Nearby animals, especially deer and smaller creatures, would have devoured such food quickly. Yet it was as though the offering had been left undisturbed, as if intended for him. James felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced into the trees, scanning Yellowstone National Park edge, but saw nothing. Still, he couldn't shake the sense of being watched. That night, as he prepared for bed, a faint rustling outside his cabin caught his attention. Peeking through the window, he saw nothing out of place, but Yellowstone National Park seemed quieter than usual. Days passed, and the strange occurrences continued. Each morning, James found more signs. A fresh claw mark on a nearby tree, small piles of food arranged neatly along his usual paths. It wasn't random. It felt intentional, as though someone or something was trying to communicate. Then one quiet afternoon, James spotted them. Standing at the edge of Yellowstone National Park, just beyond the clearing of his cabin, was the mother bear. Her cub stood close by, still small but visibly stronger than when he had rescued it. The mother bear's gaze was fixed on James, calm and steady. She didn't move closer, nor did she make a sound. James felt a mixture of awe and unease. He stood frozen on his porch, watching the bears as they watched him. The cub seemed curious, taking small steps forward before retreating back to its mother's side. James didn't dare move, unsure of what Lucky wanted or why she had returned. After what felt like an eternity, the bear nudged her cub gently and turned back toward Yellowstone National Park. They disappeared into the trees, leaving James standing in stunned silence. He didn't know why she had come, but her presence felt deliberate, as if she were watching over him. From that day forward, James noticed more signs of her presence. He found tracks around his cabin, always at a safe distance, and sometimes heard faint rustling in Yellowstone National Park nearby. It was as though the bear had claimed the area around his cabin, ensuring his safety. James couldn't explain it, but he felt an odd sense of protection. The connection between them was undeniable, yet mysterious. Whatever bond had been formed that day on the cliff, it hadn't ended when the bears disappeared into Yellowstone National Park. It had only just begun. James ventured out on another hike a week later, his camera in hand, as he explored a new trail. Yellowstone National Park was alive with the sound of birds and the rustle of leaves in the wind. He felt at ease, the earlier unease from the strange events fading into the background. But as he rounded a bend in the trail, Yellowstone National Park fell silent. The sudden absence of sound was unnerving, and James stopped in his tracks. He scanned the trees, his senses alert. A low growl echoed through the woods, deep and menacing. James turned slowly, his heart pounding as he spotted the source of the sound. A mountain lion crouched a few feet away, its golden eyes locked onto him. The predator's muscles were coiled, ready to pounce. James's mind raced, his body frozen in fear. Just as the mountain lion shifted, preparing to strike, a thunderous roar shattered the silence. From the trees, Lucky charged forward, her massive frame barreling toward the predator. The mountain lion hesitated, its predatory focus broken by the sudden threat. The bear roared again, louder this time, and the mountain lion bolted into the underbrush, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. James stood rooted to the spot, his breath shallow as Lucky turned to face him. Her cub appeared moments later, peeking out from behind a tree. James's shock gave way to a strange sense of gratitude. The bear had saved him. Lucky didn't linger. She nudged her cub forward, her calm demeanor unchanged. James watched as they retreated into Yellowstone National Park, the same protective air surrounding her. It was then he realized they weren't just watching him, they were protecting him. From that moment, James felt a connection to the bears that went beyond explanation. They had become a part of his life, silent guardians of the wilderness they all called home. James was out in Yellowstone National Park again, his camera ready to capture the beauty of the wild. He followed a trail less traveled, drawn by a strange instinct. The deeper he went, the quieter Yellowstone National Park became. The usual chirping of birds and rustling of leaves faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. As he climbed over a rocky hill, something caught his eye, a shadow moving near a cluster of large boulders. He slowed his pace, his breath shallow, and saw the mother bear. She was standing in front of what looked like a narrow cave entrance, her massive frame blocking the way. The cub peeked out from behind her, its curiosity evident. James stayed still, unsure of what to do. The bear glanced at him, her dark eyes calm but watchful. Slowly she stepped aside, her movements deliberate, as if granting him permission to approach. James hesitated, but curiosity won over caution. He moved closer, the cool air from the cave brushing against his face. The entrance was tight, but once inside, the space opened up into a small chamber. James's flashlight revealed walls covered in ancient markings, symbols, animals, and what appeared to be human figures. The drawings were crude but striking, etched deeply into the stone. One image stood out, a large bear standing beside a man, their figures intertwined as though they were equals. James felt a chill run down his spine. The markings seemed to tell a story, one he couldn't fully understand. He spent hours photographing the walls, his mind racing with questions. What was this place, and why was the bear guarding it? Back at his cabin, James contacted Hannah Sinclair, a local historian known for her knowledge of the area's folklore. When she arrived, her excitement was palpable as James described what he had found. Hannah listened intently, her expression serious when he mentioned the drawings. She explained the legend of the protector bears, an old Native American story passed down through generations. According to the tale, bears chosen by Yellowstone National Park's spirit would guard the land and protect those who showed them kindness. The markings in the cave, she suggested, could be tied to this legend. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had always respected nature, but never imagined becoming part of something so mystical. Hannah urged him to be cautious, warning that some legends held power that shouldn't be taken lightly. Still, James couldn't shake the feeling that the bear's actions had meaning, as if they were connected to the ancient story in ways he had yet to understand. James couldn't resist returning to the cave the next day. The markings still drew his attention, but this time something else caught his eye. Near the back of the chamber, hidden under loose rocks, he found a small carved stone. The carving was simple but intriguing. It showed a man holding out his hand to a bear cub, while a larger bear stood in the background watching. James turned the stone over in his hands, its weight solid yet oddly comforting. The carving felt ancient, its edges worn smooth by time. Hannah was the first person he thought of. When he showed her the stone, Hannah's face lit up with astonishment. She explained that such carvings were rare, often used in ceremonies or as talismans. The image, she said, could be interpreted as a prophecy, a sign of a bond between man and bear. James felt a mix of wonder and disbelief. Could his encounter with the bears truly be part of something foretold? Before he could dwell on it, Hannah suggested that the bears might be trying to lead him to something deeper. Days later, James noticed a shift in the mother bear's behavior. She no longer kept her distance but began guiding him through Yellowstone National Park. She would appear at the edge of his cabin, waiting for him to follow. Trust in his instincts, James obliged. She led him to untouched parts of Yellowstone National Park, hidden clearings filled with rare plants, vibrant flowers he'd never seen before, and wildlife that seemed almost unearthly in its beauty. James felt as though he had been given a key to a secret world, one only the bears could unlock. Each step he took deepened the bond between him and Yellowstone National Park. The bears had become more than just creatures of the wild. They were his guides, his protectors. James couldn't shake the feeling that he had been chosen for something greater, a role he didn't yet fully understand. One crisp morning, James set out to photograph a secluded part of Yellowstone National Park that Lucky had recently shown him. The air was still, too still, and an uneasy feeling settled over him as he noticed broken branches and fresh tracks along the path. The prints weren't from animals. These were boot marks, deep and heavy, heading toward Yellowstone National Park's heart. James quickened his pace, fear gnawing at him. As he reached the clearing, Lucky and her cub appeared, their movements cautious. The bear sniffed the air, her demeanor tense. James froze as the sound of muffled voices and snapping twigs echoed nearby. He crouched low, scanning the area. Through the dense foliage, he spotted a group of men armed with rifles. Their movements were methodical, their eyes scanning for any sign of prey. Poachers. James's heart sank as he realized the danger, not only to the bears but to the fragile ecosystem of Yellowstone National Park. The poachers set up a crude ambush near the clearing, baiting the area with fresh meat to lure wildlife. James stayed hidden, holding his breath as Lucky led her cub away from the trap, her instincts sharp. But the poachers were persistent, moving closer to the bear's retreat. James couldn't stay silent any longer. He threw a rock toward the opposite side of the clearing, creating a loud noise that drew the poachers' attention. They turned, their weapons raised, and headed in the wrong direction. Using the distraction, James moved swiftly to follow the bears, ensuring their safety. The trio found refuge in a thick grove of trees. James whispered reassurances to himself as Lucky stood protectively over her cub. The tension was palpable, every sound amplified in the silence. They waited until the voices of the poachers faded, Yellowstone National Park swallowing their presence. James knew this wasn't over. Once the coast was clear, he returned to his cabin and immediately contacted local authorities and wildlife protection agencies. He described the poachers' activities and their potential threat to Yellowstone National Park's wildlife. However, his claims were met with skepticism. Without solid evidence, the officials were hesitant to take action. Frustrated but undeterred, James realized he would need to take matters into his own hands. He reached out to Hannah, who shared his concern. Together, they began to form a plan to protect the bears in Yellowstone National Park they called home. James and Hannah spent the next few days studying the poachers' movements. Using James's knowledge of Yellowstone National Park and Hannah's understanding of wildlife behavior, they devised a plan to outwit the intruders. The mother bear, as if sensing their intent, began to cooperate in subtle ways, guiding James to areas where the poachers had recently been active. The plan was simple but risky. James would use his camera traps to capture evidence of the poachers' illegal activities, while Hannah coordinated with a wildlife protection agency to bring in reinforcements. The bears, with their keen instincts and strength, would act as a natural deterrent. One evening, James set up a series of bait-free traps near the poachers' usual path. He scattered the area with natural markers that only the bears would recognize. Scratches on trees and overturned rocks. Lucky seemed to understand, her movements deliberate as she led her cub away from danger. The poachers returned the next morning, their traps empty and their frustration evident. They ventured deeper into Yellowstone National Park, unaware that James was tracking their every move from a safe distance. When the poachers stumbled upon the false trail James had created, they split up, hoping to corner their quarry. That's when Lucky made her move. Emerging from the shadows, she let out a deep, resonant growl that froze the men in their tracks. The cub stayed hidden as Lucky advanced, her sheer size and presence enough to send two of the poachers scrambling. James coordinated with Hannah via a walkie-talkie, signaling her to alert the authorities. Meanwhile, the remaining poachers attempted to regroup, only to find themselves outmatched by the terrain. Yellowstone National Park seemed to turn against them. Hidden roots tripped them, dense foliage blocked their paths, and the oppressive silence unnerved them. Lucky and James worked in unison, though no words were exchanged. James used his presence to steer the poachers toward a narrow ravine, where their escape routes were limited. The bears' roars echoed through the trees, a sound that sent shivers down James's spine. Despite knowing he was not her target, the air grew heavy with smoke as James's chest tightened in panic. What began as a tense standoff with the poachers had now turned into a race against a raging forest fire. Somewhere deep in the woods, the dry heat had sparked an uncontrollable blaze, and the flames were spreading fast. The mother bear's growl cut through the crackling of the fire. She nudged her cub, urging it to move, and James quickly followed, his heart pounding in rhythm with their hurried steps. Yellowstone National Park seemed alive with chaos. Branches snapped overhead, embers floated like fireflies, and the once green sanctuary was cloaked in an orange glow. Behind them, the poachers shouted in desperation. They hadn't anticipated the fire either, and were now caught in the same deadly web. James glanced back, his instincts warring between helping the men and ensuring his own survival. Lucky growled again, her urgency unmistakable. James pushed forward, knowing he couldn't afford to hesitate. The carved stone in his pocket grew warm, its surface vibrating faintly. James paused, confused by the sensation, but the fire's intensity forced him onward. The path ahead was treacherous, blocked by fallen trees and burning undergrowth. The mother bear, surprisingly calm, led the way, her movements steady and sure. As they neared a steep incline, the ground beneath James gave way, sending him sliding down a rocky slope. He landed hard, the stone tumbling from his pocket and glowing faintly in the ash-covered ground. Lucky roared, leaping down after him, her cub close behind. James scrambled to his feet, scooping up the stone. Its glow seemed to pulse, lighting a faint path through the dense smoke. The poachers reappeared, their faces streaked with soot, desperation etched into their expressions. They stumbled through the flames, coughing and disoriented, their weapons abandoned in the chaos. For a moment, their eyes met James's, and he saw fear, not malice, but there was no time to dwell on their plight. Soon after, James and Lucky were back to safety. After the fire, James remained on edge. Yellowstone National Park was quieter than usual, but its silence carried an unease. The carved stone, now back in his pocket, no longer glowed but seemed heavier than before. James couldn't shake the feeling that Yellowstone National Park wasn't done with him yet. One morning, as James stepped outside his cabin, he found Lucky waiting nearby. She held something unusual in her mouth, a plant with vivid golden leaves and delicate white blossoms. She placed it gently on the ground, nudging it toward him before retreating into the shadows with her cub. James examined the plant carefully, noting its unique features. Unsure of its significance, he brought it to Hannah, who immediately recognized it, her face lit with a mixture of astonishment and urgency. She explained that the plant resembled one from old folklore, believed to hold medicinal properties capable of curing diseases no modern medicine could treat. If confirmed, it could save countless lives. Hannah and James began research in the plant, consulting biologists and herbalists. Their findings revealed its potential as a cure for a rare but deadly illness affecting local wildlife and possibly humans. News of the discovery spread quickly, drawing attention from conservationists and, unfortunately, from the poachers. The poachers returned, this time with reinforcements. Their numbers had grown, and they were armed with advanced tools, ready to strip Yellowstone National Park of its rare treasures. The once burning fire of their greed was now a roaring blaze, threatening to consume everything James and the bears held dear. The poachers moved stealthily, marking trees and setting traps. James watched helplessly as they invaded deeper into the wilderness. He knew the bears couldn't fight this battle alone, and the carved stone felt like a distant hope. Hannah urged him to contact authorities again, but past experiences left him doubtful they'd act in time. James decided to take a stand. He began to track the poachers' movements, noting their patterns and sabotaging their traps where he could. The mother bear, as though sensing his determination, appeared more frequently, guiding him to safe paths and alerting him to the poachers' locations. One night, James spotted the poachers near a grove of rare plants. The men worked swiftly, uprooting the delicate treasures. James couldn't confront them directly, but took photos and video evidence, determined to expose their crimes. As he crept closer, the sound of the mother bear's warning growl echoed through Yellowstone National Park. The poachers froze, their flashlights darting wildly. The bear's presence forced them to retreat, but James knew they wouldn't stay away for long. Time was running out, and Yellowstone National Park's rare gifts were at stake. James realized he couldn't protect Yellowstone National Park alone. With Hannah's help, he began gathering the local community, using the carved stone and the mother bear's story to illustrate Yellowstone National Park's importance. At first, people were skeptical, dismissing his tales as exaggerations. But James's evidence, the glowing stone, the plant's potential as a cure, and footage of the poachers captured their attention. He spoke passionately, sharing how Yellowstone National Park wasn't just a collection of trees, but a living, breathing entity that protected them in return. Hannah added her knowledge of the protector bears, emphasizing the role of the community in preserving their shared heritage. Slowly, the townspeople began to understand. Word spread, and volunteers came forward. Together, they set up patrols, erected warning signs, and started documenting Yellowstone National Park's rare flora and fauna. Local officials, pressured by the community, finally agreed to send reinforcements to guard the area. But the poachers had one final, devastating plan. Frustrated by their failed attempts, they decided to destroy Yellowstone National Park altogether. They planted explosives near the bear's cave, intending to collapse the entire area and claim its resources under the guise of a natural disaster. The tension in the air was suffocating as James and the volunteers worked through the night to locate the explosives. Every sound in Yellowstone National Park felt amplified. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant hoot of an owl, and the ominous hum of the timers counting down. The carved stone in James's pocket grew heavier, a silent reminder of the stakes. Unbeknownst to the poachers, Yellowstone National Park wasn't silent. Lucky and her cub, joined by other animals, were already on the move. Deer darted through the trees, leading the poachers astray, while flocks of birds swooped low, scattering them. Yellowstone National Park seemed alive with resistance, each creature playing its part in protecting their home. James spotted the poachers near the cave, their movements frantic as they finalized their plan. The glow of their flashlights illuminated a pile of explosives placed at the cave's entrance. James knew he had to act fast. He signaled to the volunteers to stay back while he crept closer, his heart pounding. Lucky appeared from the shadows, her cub trailing behind. She let out a low growl, drawing the poachers' attention. They froze, their weapons trembling in their hands. Before they could react, the bear charged, scattering them like leaves in the wind. Her cub stayed hidden, but the presence of other animals, wolves, foxes, and even a pair of hawks circling above, created chaos. Amidst the commotion, James reached the explosives. The timers displayed less than 3 minutes. His hands trembled as he began cutting wires, relying on instinct and the faint vibration of the carved stone to guide him. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked. The sounds of the animals' coordinated attack, keeping the poachers at bay. One of the poachers, desperate and cornered, spotted James and raised a weapon. Before he could take aim, Lucky intervened, her massive form blocking his path. The poacher stumbled backward, his fear outweighing his greed. He dropped his weapon and fled, leaving his comrades to fend for themselves. As the final wire was severed, James breathed a sigh of relief. Too soon. A stray spark from a damaged explosive ignited a small blast, throwing James backward. The sound echoed through Yellowstone National Park, sending birds scattering into the sky. Lucky rushed to James's side, nudging him gently. Though dazed and injured, he managed to stand, clutching the carved stone tightly. The poachers, defeated and terrified, were captured by the volunteers who had arrived with local authorities. James watched as Lucky and her cub retreated into Yellowstone National Park, their forms blending into the shadows. Yellowstone National Park had won, but not without cost. James's injuries served as a painful reminder of the dangers they had faced together. Days after the explosion, James woke in a hospital bed, his body aching but alive. Hannah sat nearby, her face lighting up when she saw him stir. She told him how the community had rallied around him, calling him a hero for his bravery. James didn't feel like a hero. He thought of Yellowstone National Park, the mother bear, and the carved stone that had guided him. His injuries felt like a small price to pay for saving something so precious. As he recovered, visitors came to thank him. Locals, environmentalists, and even children who had grown up exploring Yellowstone National Park. The poachers were prosecuted, their crimes laid bare for all to see. With their threat eliminated, Yellowstone National Park began to heal. New shoots sprouted where fires had once raged, and animals returned to their homes. The community, inspired by James's dedication, worked tirelessly to protect Yellowstone National Park. They established protected zones, planted trees, and educated others about the importance of conservation. James, now fully recovered, returned to his cabin at Yellowstone National Park's edge. Lucky visited occasionally, her cub now growing stronger. James felt a deep connection to them, a bond forged in fire and danger. The carved stone remained on his desk, a constant reminder of the journey he had undertaken. James dedicated himself to Yellowstone National Park's preservation, leading community efforts and documenting its beauty for the world to see. Yellowstone National Park, once a battleground, had become a symbol of unity and resilience, a testament to what could be achieved when man and nature stood together. Yellowstone National Park was quiet one crisp autumn morning, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded months earlier. James stood on the porch of his cabin, sipping a steaming cup of tea, watching the golden leaves fall gently to the ground. Lucky and her cub hadn't visited in weeks, and a strange emptiness had settled over him. Their absence was profound, like losing old friends. Every morning, James scanned the edge of the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of the familiar figures that had become a part of his life. But Yellowstone National Park seemed to whisper that they were gone. He knew this was their way. The bears belonged to the wild, and their connection had always been fleeting. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, James decided to take a walk. The carved stone sat on his desk, its glow having faded since the poachers were driven away. He slipped it into his pocket, feeling its cool surface against his palm, and ventured into the woods. The trail felt different, quieter somehow. Yellowstone National Park, though alive with rustling leaves and distant animal calls, seemed to hold its breath. As he walked, James remembered the mother bear's gift, a rare plant she had brought him from deep within Yellowstone National Park. Hannah had helped identify it as a species long thought extinct, its properties potentially groundbreaking. After rigorous testing and collaboration with researchers, it was discovered that the plant held medicinal properties capable of treating a rare and deadly disease. News of the breakthrough spread quickly, and the plant was cultivated responsibly under strict protection. James's story of the mother bear's gift became a beacon of hope, proving the value of preserving the natural world. But even as his work gained global recognition, James's heart remained tethered to Yellowstone National Park. That night, his steps led him to the clearing where he had first encountered Lucky and her cub. The memories flooded back, her fierce protection, her calm guidance, and the unspoken bond they had shared. James sat on a fallen log, the stone in his hand. He thought about how much had changed. Yellowstone National Park was thriving, its scars from the fire and the poachers fading with time. The community had transformed, united in their mission to protect the land. Yet despite these victories, James couldn't shake the ache of their absence. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, James closed his eyes, feeling the cool breeze against his face. He imagined the bears somewhere, deep in the wilderness, free and untamed, their bond with him now a part of Yellowstone National Park's eternal rhythm. Days turned into weeks, and while the bears never returned, James found solace in the life they had inspired him to lead. His work as a conservationist gained momentum. He traveled the world, sharing his story with communities, scientists, and policymakers. He spoke of the carved stone, Yellowstone National Park's resilience, and the silent guardians who had entrusted him with their secrets. The stone, now a symbol of his journey, became a centerpiece in his presentations. It wasn't just a relic, it was a reminder of the connection between humans and nature, a bond that required respect and care. James's passion ignited a movement, inspiring others to fight for endangered species and fragile ecosystems. Years later, the rare plant cultivated from the mother bear's gift became a key component in saving countless lives. Hospitals and research facilities worldwide used it to treat diseases that had once been untreatable. James often thought of the bear when he read reports of the lives saved, imagining her watching over him still, her gift continuing to make a difference. As time passed, James grew older. The cabin at Yellowstone National Park's edge became both a refuge and a place of reflection. He often sat on the porch, gazing at the woods, his mind filled with memories. The carved stone remained on his desk, its glow faint but steady, as if Yellowstone National Park still watched over him. One winter morning, as snow blanketed the ground, James received a letter. It was an invitation to receive an international award for his contributions to conservation. The recognition was humbling, but James's thoughts drifted back to the bears. They had given him more than a story. They had given him purpose. On the night of the ceremony, James stood before a packed audience. He spoke not of himself, but of Yellowstone National Park, the bears, and the lessons they had taught him. He shared how their gift had saved lives and how the bond between man and nature could heal even the deepest wounds. After the applause faded, James returned to his cabin, feeling a sense of peace. He knew his work would continue through the people he had inspired. Yellowstone National Park, the bears, and the carved stone had become a legacy far greater than he could have imagined. One spring morning, as the first buds began to bloom, James ventured into the woods one last time. He carried the stone with him, its surface smooth and warm in his hand. At the clearing, where it had all begun, he placed the stone gently on the ground, a final tribute to the bears in Yellowstone National Park that had changed his life. As he walked away, Yellowstone National Park seemed to hum with life, its whispers carrying a message of gratitude and farewell. James didn't look back, but he felt their presence, a quiet reassurance that their bond would endure. The carved stone rested in James's hand for the final time as he prepared to donate it to the National Museum of Conservation. Its surface still held faint traces of warmth, as though Yellowstone National Park's life force pulsed within it. It wasn't an easy decision to part with something so deeply personal, but James knew the stone's story was bigger than him. The museum staff greeted James warmly, treating the carved stone with reverence as they placed it in a glass display case. The exhibit, titled Guardians of the Wild, was unveiled with a ceremony. The story of James, the bears, and their shared fight to protect Yellowstone National Park drew visitors from all over the world. The stone became a symbol of hope, reminding people of the fragile bond between humans and nature. James stood quietly among the crowd, watching children marvel at the glowing artifact and listening to parents explain its significance. For the first time, he truly understood how far their story had traveled. The carved stone wasn't just an object, it was a beacon, inspiring others to act with compassion and responsibility toward the world around them. As the evening quieted, James returned to his cabin, the memories of his journey swirling in his mind. That night, he dreamed vividly. In his dream, Yellowstone National Park appeared vibrant and alive, its trees towering and majestic. Lucky stood at the edge of the clearing, her cub now fully grown beside her. They looked at him with calm, knowing eyes. James felt a wave of reassurance as the bears turned and walked deeper into Yellowstone National Park. He followed the path lit by an ethereal glow. As he walked, he saw other animals emerging: deer, foxes, owls, all moving in harmony. They weren't fleeing or fighting, but protecting their home with quiet determination. The vision shifted, and James found himself standing at the edge of Yellowstone National Park. He realized the message was clear. The responsibility of safeguarding their home wasn't just his or humanity's, it was shared by all living creatures. Each species in its own way played a role in maintaining the balance of the ecosystem. When James awoke, the sense of connection lingered. He felt a renewed purpose, one that extended beyond his previous efforts. His work wasn't just about saving wildlife, but also fostering a deeper understanding of how interconnected the natural world truly was. In the following months, James used his growing platform to advocate more vigorously for wildlife protection. He traveled to schools, universities, and global conferences, sharing stories of Yellowstone National Park and the bears. He highlighted the lessons he had learned about coexistence and the importance of kindness, not just toward animals, but to all forms of life. James collaborated with conservation groups to launch initiatives aimed at protecting endangered species and restoring damaged ecosystems. One campaign, Guardians Together, focused on teaching communities how to live harmoniously with wildlife. The initiative gained momentum, spreading across regions and inspiring grassroots movements. Back in his small town, James noticed changes. The locals, who once viewed Yellowstone National Park as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, now spoke of it with pride. Children led tree planting drives, and families volunteered to maintain trails and wildlife corridors. The community had embraced its role as stewards of the land, mirroring the lessons James had shared. Meanwhile, the museum exhibit became a cultural phenomenon. Visitors left messages of gratitude and pledges to protect nature in a guest book placed near the carved stone. Some even sent letters to James, sharing how his story had inspired them to make changes in their own lives. As James's advocacy work expanded, so did the impact of his message. Governments began implementing stronger wildlife protection laws, inspired by the story of the bears and their gift. Scientists worked tirelessly to preserve rare plant species, including the one Lucky had brought to James. The plant's medicinal properties continued to save lives, its cultivation carefully monitored to ensure sustainability. Despite his newfound fame, James never strayed far from Yellowstone National Park. He still spent quiet mornings on his porch, sipping tea and listening to the rustling leaves. Yellowstone National Park had given him so much: a sense of purpose, a community, and a bond with the wild that would never fade. One day, while walking a familiar trail, James paused at the clearing where he had last seen Lucky and her cub. The area was alive with birdsong, and the sunlight filtered through the trees in golden beams. He closed his eyes, feeling Yellowstone National Park's pulse, and smiled. He knew the bears were out there, somewhere in the wilderness, continuing to protect their home just as he was protecting his. Their connection wasn't bound by time or space. It was eternal, a testament to the power of unity and kindness. The carved stone remained in the museum, its glow a reminder of the extraordinary bond between man and nature. But for James, the true legacy was the change it had sparked in people's hearts. Through the bears, Yellowstone National Park, and the stone, he had found a way to inspire others to see the world differently, to cherish it, nurture it, and fight for it. One crisp autumn morning, James set out on a walk along a less traveled trail, deep within Yellowstone National Park. The air was cool and the leaves were a mix of fiery orange and golden yellow. Though the path was unfamiliar, James felt an inexplicable pull to keep moving forward. Yellowstone National Park was alive with quiet whispers of wind through the trees and the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. After hours of walking, James stumbled upon something unusual. Hidden beneath a dense cover of ivy and moss was the entrance to a cave. It was smaller than the one he had encountered before, but its presence was unmistakable. As he stepped closer, a faint glow emanated from inside, similar to the light of the carved stone that had once guided him. Inside, James found walls adorned with intricate markings, much like the ones in the first cave. The patterns told a story of protector bears in a different part of Yellowstone National Park. These bears, like the ones he had encountered, seemed to safeguard another region. The markings hinted at an unbroken cycle, where the role of guardianship passed from one generation to the next. James felt a deep sense of awe. The discovery reinforced what he had always believed. Yellowstone National Park and its protectors existed in harmony, ensuring the balance of nature. But the markings also carried a warning. They depicted the struggles between the protectors and forces of destruction, a reminder that the cycle could be disrupted if not carefully preserved. Inspired by this discovery, James returned to the town with a renewed sense of purpose. He shared the story of the new cave with Hannah and the community. They were captivated, and the tale of the protector bears began to spread far beyond their small town. People traveled from nearby villages to hear James speak, drawn by the mystery and the lessons embedded in the story. With the support of the community, James decided to take his mission a step further. He used his growing influence to open a wildlife sanctuary near Yellowstone National Park. The sanctuary became a haven for injured animals, a place where they could heal and be released back into the wild. It also served as an educational center, teaching visitors, especially children, about the importance of protecting wildlife and treating animals with kindness. The sanctuary quickly became a beacon of hope. Families visited to learn about Yellowstone National Park's ecosystem and the stories of the protector bears. Children listened with wide eyes as James recounted his adventures, describing the bravery of Lucky and her cub. He taught them that animals, like humans, had families, emotions, and a deep connection to their homes. One day, James spoke to a group of children who had never been taught to value animals. He explained how even the smallest act of kindness could make a difference. He shared how Lucky had risked her life to save her cub and how their actions had inspired him to protect Yellowstone National Park. The children asked questions, their curiosity growing with every answer. James told them that kindness wasn't just about helping animals. It was about creating a world where all living beings could thrive together. He encouraged them to look beyond their fears and see the beauty in the creatures they once thought were frightening or unimportant. By the end of the day, the children were planting trees and helping build shelters for the sanctuary's animals, their hearts touched by the stories they had heard. The sanctuary also became a hub for researchers and conservationists. They studied the rare plants, including the one given to James by the mother bear, which was now being used to treat diseases worldwide. The plant's properties were carefully cultivated, ensuring that its benefits could be shared without harming Yellowstone National Park's delicate balance. As the years passed, the sanctuary grew in size and reputation. James's story was featured in books, documentaries, and educational programs. But despite the recognition, James remained grounded. He spent most of his time walking through the sanctuary, tending to the animals and speaking with visitors. He believed his greatest achievement wasn't the fame, but the spark of change he saw in people's hearts. One evening, James received a letter from a child who had visited the sanctuary years ago. The child, now a young adult, wrote about how the experience had shaped their life. They had become a conservationist, working to protect endangered species in another part of the world. They thanked James for teaching them the value of kindness and the importance of protecting nature. James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He realized that the legacy of the protector bears wasn't just about preserving Yellowstone National Park. It was about inspiring others to carry the message forward. The cycle of guardianship wasn't limited to bears. It extended to humans who chose to protect the world around them. One day, as James walked along the trail near the cave, he paused and placed his hand on the markings. He thought about the mother bear, her cub, and the unseen protectors who continued their work elsewhere. He understood now that the bond he had felt with the bears was part of a larger story, one that connected all living beings in a shared responsibility to protect their home. The moral of James's journey was clear. Kindness, whether toward animals, people, or the environment, created ripples that could transform the world. By recognizing the value of every living thing, humans could restore the balance that had been disrupted for so long. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Yellowstone National Park in a warm, golden glow, James stood quietly, feeling the pulse of life around him. He knew his work was far from over, but he also knew he wasn't alone. The legacy of the protector bears lived on in the sanctuary, in the carved stone, and in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by their story. The story of the man's brave action to rescue a bear cub isn't just a test of courage. It's a profound lesson about the bond between humans and nature. These heart-stopping moments make us reflect on the choices we face in life, on what it means to put our own lives at risk just to save another being. While his decision was not easy, it proved that even the smallest acts can make a world of difference, changing the course of fate. From these moments, we realize that we are not just protectors, but also creators of change in the world around us. If this story has touched your heart, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on other inspiring tales. We're committed to bringing you more exciting and emotional journeys, full of courage, love, and sacrifice. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family so we can spread this meaningful message to everyone. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.